My name is Stella Taylor. I'm 34 years old. And the night that shattered everything wasn't when I commanded 3,000 troops in classified operations overseas, or when I received security briefings that presidents depend on to make life or death decisions. It was my nephew's graduation party in Rochester, watching my brother-in-law pour expensive scotch while explaining to his golf buddies why his sister-in-law had wasted her potential on military service. "Poor Stella," he announced over prime rib and champagne, his voice carrying that familiar tone of family pity. 34 and still playing dress-up in that uniform. When's she gonna get a real job? The laughter rippled through our table like poison. 12 relatives who'd measured my worth in missed family dinners and deployment schedules, celebrating another wedding while dismissing the woman who'd spent 15 years climbing higher than any of them could imagine. "Unlike my Sarah," Aunt Linda added, nodding toward her daughter, the regional sales manager, who's building something meaningful in the private sector. Tonight, they'd discover exactly who'd been taking orders from whom. The dining room felt like a tribunal where I'd been found guilty before the trial even started. Mom's house in Westchester, the one Dad bought after his promotion to regional VP, gleaming with the kind of suburban success that gets featured in Better Homes and Gardens. Crystal chandelier casting warm light over the mahogany table that seated 12. Bone china that only came out for holidays, and sterling silver that reflected the faces of people who'd made it in America. Thanksgiving 2023. 18 members of the Taylor Morrison clan gathered to celebrate gratitude, tradition, and the unspoken hierarchy that placed me somewhere between the teenagers' table and actual respectability. I sat in the middle, still wearing my dress blues from the Veterans Day ceremony I'd attended that morning, the jacket folded carefully over the back of my chair, invisible to relatives who'd long since stopped seeing me as anything more than the family's military curiosity. Around me, conversations flowed like expensive wine: quarterly earnings, private school tuitions, vacation homes in the Hamptons, the kind of success that could be measured in tax brackets and country club memberships. The table groaned under Mom's feast. Herb-crusted turkey that had been brining for 3 days, truffle stuffing, cranberry sauce made from scratch, and sweet potato casserole that would be photographed for her Instagram before anyone took a bite. Everything picture perfect, everything designed to project the image of a family that had achieved the American dream. But success, in the Taylor family, had very specific measurements, and I failed every single one. "Before we eat," Dad announced, standing with his wine glass raised, his Brooks Brothers suit perfectly pressed despite spending the morning watching football, "I want to say how proud I am of this family. Real achievers, all of us." The familiar dread settled in my chest like a weight I'd been carrying for 15 years. I gripped my napkin under the table, feeling the calluses on my hands from weapons training that they'd never understand. "My brother Tom just closed his biggest merger yet," Dad continued, his voice swelling with the kind of approval I'd spent 3 decades trying to earn. $38 million. Now that's what I call building something meaningful. The applause was immediate. Uncle Tom basked in it like sunlight, his wife Carol beaming beside him, while their twin boys sophomores at Princeton clapped for their successful father. This was achievement the Taylor family understood: quantifiable, prestigious, worthy of dinner conversation. "And Linda just made partner at her law firm," Dad added, raising his glass higher. "Youngest in their history. A real trailblazer." More applause. My cousin Linda stood briefly, her Armani suit and confident smile representing everything this family valued. Private sector success, billable hours, the kind of career that impressed people at cocktail parties. "But what really makes me proud," Dad's voice shifted, taking on that particular tone of paternal satisfaction that had never been directed at me, "is that everyone at this table has built real careers. Careers that matter." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Real careers. Not whatever his daughter was doing in her little uniform. "Well, almost everyone," Uncle Tom chimed in with a laugh that cut like a scalpel. "Hey Stella, how's that army gig treating you? Still saluting people all day?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was the kind of casual, dismissive amusement that came from people who were completely certain of their superiority. Cousin Brian covered his mouth with his hand. Aunt Susan whispered something to her husband that made them both smile sympathetically. Maybe she can teach the kids how to march, Linda added, her voice carrying that mixture of affection and condescension that defined our relationship. Remember when we used to play war in the backyard? Playing war. While they'd been playing house in corporate boardrooms, I'd been learning what war actually meant. Stella's always been different, Mom offered weakly, the kind of maternal defense that only emphasized how indefensible my choices appeared to everyone else. She likes structure. Structure. As if 15 years of military service could be reduced to a personality quirk, like preferring vanilla over chocolate. The thing is, Dad said, settling back into his chair with the authority of someone who'd never been wrong about family dynamics, Stella's got a good heart. She wants to serve. But you'll never make it big in that world, honey. The military's just. It's a job. A decent job, but not a career that builds real wealth or influence. Real wealth. Real influence. While he'd been building his regional sales empire, I'd been building something they couldn't measure in profit margins or stock options. What they couldn't know, was that 48 hours earlier, I'd been sworn in as Brigadier General, the youngest woman to achieve that rank in the Army's 248-year history. That their decent job daughter now outranked 99.7% of everyone who'd ever worn the uniform. That the structure they mocked included commanding authority over installations that housed 30,000 personnel. The memory hit me like incoming artillery. 2 days ago, standing in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes while the Secretary of the Army pinned a single star to my shoulder boards. The weight of that moment, not the physical weight of the medal, but the responsibility it represented, settling on me like armor I'd spent 15 years earning the right to wear. I just worry about your future, Aunt Carol added, her voice carrying that particular mixture of love and disappointment that had defined family dinners since I'd chosen West Point over Harvard Business School. 34 and still single, still moving every few years. What happens when you retire? What kind of life is that? What kind of life? While she'd been organizing charity galas in Greenwich, I'd been organizing operations that prevented international incidents from becoming front-page news. But there was no way to explain that without violating security protocols that carried court-martial consequences. No way to tell them that their structurally oriented daughter had just been entrusted with classified responsibilities that kept diplomats awake at night. You know what your problem is, Stella? Uncle Tom was warming to his favorite topic, analyzing my failures. You're too loyal, too willing to take orders instead of giving them. In the real world, leaders make the big money. Followers just follow. Followers. The irony would have been funny if it didn't cut so deep. While he'd been following quarterly reports and market trends, I'd been leading soldiers through situations where following orders wasn't optional. It was the difference between mission success and body bags coming home. Maybe it's not too late, Brian suggested with the kind of false hope that hurt more than open mockery. I mean, you're still young. You could transition to the private sector. Use that military discipline in a real career. A real career. The phrase echoed through Mom's dining room like gunfire, finding its target with precision that came from 15 years of practice. I looked around the table at these people I'd shared blood and holidays with, Uncle Tom who'd never missed a quarterly earnings call, Linda who billed 300 hours a month to make partner, Dad who'd built his regional empire one insurance policy at a time, good people, successful people, people who measured worth in ways that made sense to suburban dinner conversations. But none of them had ever stood in a briefing room at 0500, making decisions that could prevent or precipitate international conflicts. None of them had earned the trust of soldiers who'd follow their orders into hostile territory. None of them understood that some achievements couldn't be measured in tax returns or corner offices. We're just glad you found something that makes you happy, Dad concluded with finality, raising his wine glass in what was supposed to be a toast but felt like a verdict. Even if it's not. Well, even if it won't ever be more than it is. The silence that followed was absolute. 18 people holding their breath while I absorbed their assessment of my life, my choices, my worth. What they didn't know was that in 72 hours, everything would change. In 72 hours, the Pentagon would announce the youngest female brigadier general in Army history. In 72 hours, Their follower daughter would be revealed as someone who commanded more respect than any of their corporate achievements had ever earned. But tonight, I was just Stella, the girl who'd chosen structure over profit, the disappointment who'd settled for government work. The phone buzzed against my thigh at exactly 8:47 p.m., cutting through Uncle Tom's story about his latest golf tournament victory. The vibration was sharp, insistent, the kind that meant someone with serious authority needed me immediately. I pulled it out discreetly, keeping it below table level while conversations continued around me like I was already invisible. The screen showed a number I recognized instantly. Classified, Fort Belvoir Operations. My stomach dropped like an express elevator with cut cables. "Excuse me," I said quietly, pushing back from the table while Dad was explaining why his insurance company's Q4 numbers exceeded projections. "I need to take this." Nobody noticed. They were too busy discussing Linda's latest case, Tom's merger, the kind of success that came with expense accounts and stock options. I stepped onto Mom's back porch, closing the French doors behind me. November air hit my face like a slap, carrying the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves. Through the windows, I could see my family bathed in warm light, laughing, gesturing, living their lives while mine was about to pivot in a direction they couldn't imagine. I answered on the third ring. "Colonel Taylor." My voice was crisp, professional, nothing like the family disappointment who'd been sitting at that table 30 seconds ago. "Colonel, this is General Morrison's aide." The voice was young, urgent, carrying that edge I'd heard before when situations escalated beyond normal protocols. "The General requires your immediate presence at the Pentagon. Intelligence briefing at Totusine at 300 hours. Highest priority. 2,300 hours. 11 p.m. While my family would be settling into their recliners for post-dinner conversation, I'd be in a classified briefing room receiving information that presidents needed to make decisions about national security. "Understood," I said, my mind already calculating routes, response times, the logistics of transitioning from family dinner to whatever crisis required my expertise. "I'll be there." "Ma'am, the General specifically requested you lead the tactical assessment," he said, and I quote, "Get me Taylor. She's the only one who can see all the moving parts." The only one who can see all the moving parts, while they'd been seeing me as someone who couldn't see past her own limitations. I hung up and stood in the cold for exactly 10 seconds, feeling the weight of two worlds, the one where I was pitied and the one where I was irreplaceable. Through the glass, Uncle Tom was gesturing expansively, probably explaining why military service was admirable but not lucrative. Dad was nodding along, both of them certain they understood the trajectory of careers built on service rather than profit. What they didn't understand was that service meant being the person generals called when normal protocols weren't sufficient. When situations required someone who could assess complex intelligence, coordinate multi-agency responses, and make recommendations that could prevent international incidents from becoming front-page disasters. I walked back through those French doors like I was crossing between universes. The warmth hit me, Mom's perfect dining room, the sound of silverware against china, 18 voices discussing suburban achievements, while my phone buzzed with alerts that meant someone, somewhere, was facing a crisis that required immediate military leadership. "Where are you going?" Mom asked as I reached for my dress jacket, confusion evident in her voice. "We haven't had dessert yet. I made your favorite apple pie." I slipped the jacket on, feeling the weight of my rank insignia, the silver oak leaves that identified me as someone these people had never bothered to truly see. Around me, conversations slowed as relatives noticed their decent job family member preparing to leave their celebration. "Duty calls," I said simply, buttoning my jacket with the precision that came from 15 years of wearing the uniform with pride they'd never understood. The silence that followed was different from dinner conversation silence. This was the quiet of people processing something they couldn't quite categorize, watching their little military career relative respond to something that clearly wasn't little at all. "But it's Thanksgiving," Aunt Carol protested weakly. "Can't someone else handle whatever it is?" I looked at her, this woman who'd spent the evening explaining why my choices had limited my potential, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not resentment, but clarity. The kind of clarity that came from understanding exactly where I belonged in the larger scheme of things. "Ma'am," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd never let them hear before. When generals call, colonels respond. Colonels. The word landed in that dining room like a flashbang grenade, stunning 18 people who'd spent the evening treating me like I held some entry-level position in America's largest bureaucracy. I moved toward the door while they processed what I'd just revealed, that their follower daughter outranked most of the military officers they'd ever seen in movies or on television. That the little career they'd been pitying was actually a position of significant authority in the world's most powerful military. Colonels? Dad's voice cracked on the word, everything he thought he knew about military hierarchy suddenly crumbling. But I was already at the door, car keys in hand, mind shifting into the operational focus that had carried me through every promotion, every challenge, every moment when my country needed someone who could see all the moving parts and coordinate responses that kept civilians safe in their suburban dining rooms. Behind me, I could hear voices rising in confusion, questions overlapping as they struggled to reconcile the woman they'd dismissed with the rank I'd just revealed. The last thing I heard before the door closed was Uncle Tom's voice, smaller now, uncertain. "Wait. How high is Colonel exactly?" By the time they figured out the answer, I'd be in the Pentagon, leading an intelligence briefing that would remind me exactly why their opinion of my career had never mattered. Some battles aren't fought for family approval. Some battles are fought so families can sleep safely, never knowing how close they came to losing everything they took for granted. Tonight was one of those battles. And their little military career daughter was about to prove she'd been ready for it all along. The Pentagon at 11 p.m. looked like the nerve center of an empire under siege. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while dozens of personnel moved through corridors with the controlled urgency that came from managing crises most Americans would never know existed. Security checkpoints, biometric scanners, armed guards who recognized me on sight and waved me through with the efficiency of people who understood that seconds could mean the difference between containment and catastrophe. I cleared 3 levels of classified access in under 2 minutes, my heels echoing against polished floors as I moved toward the Strategic Operations Center. The sound carried authority. I'd never let my family hear the sharp, confident stride of someone who belonged in rooms where decisions got made about national security. The vault door swung open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing what waited beyond, America's digital war room. 40-foot screens stretched floor to ceiling, displaying maps of the United States painted in angry reds and hostile oranges, cyber attack vectors multiplying faster than we could track them, power grids showing vulnerabilities across 6 states, hospital networks compromised, air traffic control systems experiencing anomalous activity that meant someone was testing our defenses before launching something bigger. 30 of the military's finest cyber warriors hunched over terminals, their faces bathed in the glow of code that represented enemies attacking our infrastructure, while families like mine sat around dinner tables, completely unaware that their entire world was under digital assault. That's when I saw him. General Morrison. 4 stars on his shoulders, 3 decades of service etched into his face, standing before a tactical display showing real-time attacks on 17 critical systems. When I entered, this man who'd commanded divisions in Iraq and Afghanistan, who'd briefed presidents and testified before Congress, who'd stared down terrorists and dictators, he stood and saluted me first. Colonel Taylor, his voice filled that massive room with the respect I'd never heard in Mom's dining room. "Thank God you're here." I moved toward the command station, my station feeling 30 pairs of eyes tracking my approach. Some I recognized from previous operations. Others were new faces who'd heard my name in briefings but never seen me lead under pressure. All of them waiting to see what their youngest colonel would do when the stakes were higher than training simulations. "Situation report," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the operations center. "Coordinated cyber assault launched at 2,145 hours, Morrison said, gesturing toward displays showing infection spreading through our digital infrastructure like cancer. Multiple zero-day exploits. Foreign actors targeting power grids, financial networks, hospital systems, emergency services. We're looking at potential cascade failures that could affect 50 million Americans by morning." 50 million. While my family had been discussing Linda's promotion and Tom's merger, 50 million Americans had been placed in danger by enemies who'd spent months planning this assault. "Current defensive posture?" I asked. scanning tactical displays that showed our response teams scrambling to contain threats multiplying faster than we could neutralize them. Overwhelmed, Morrison admitted with the honesty that came from understanding exactly what we were facing. Standard protocols aren't working. They've anticipated every countermeasure. Every response we deploy, they've already planned 3 steps ahead. I looked at screens showing attack vectors that represented months of careful planning, sophisticated malware designed to cripple the systems that kept modern civilization running. Power plants, water treatment facilities, hospitals, the infrastructure that allowed families to gather for holiday dinners without worrying about whether their lights would work tomorrow. "Give me full access," I said, moving toward the central command terminal. Every compromised system, every attack vector, every piece of enemy code they've deployed. Morrison nodded to a technician who began transferring data to my station. Screens around me exploded with information, terabytes of hostile code, maps of infected networks, real-time feeds showing the battle for America's digital infrastructure. This was where I belonged. Not at dinner tables where people measured success in quarterly earnings, but in rooms where success meant preventing catastrophes that would dominate headlines for decades. Where leadership wasn't about billable hours or profit margins, but about coordinating responses that kept 300 million Americans safe while they slept. My fingers hit the keyboard, and something fundamental shifted in that room. The family disappointment disappeared. The mocked daughter vanished. What remained was the weapon I'd spent 15 years becoming, a strategic mind trained to see patterns others missed, to anticipate enemy moves, to coordinate complex operations under pressure that would break most people. "Initiating counteroffensive protocols," I announced, my voice carrying across the operations center with authority that made conversations stop. "All teams report readiness status. Cyber Division ready. Intelligence Division ready. Electronic Warfare Division ready." 30 voices confirming what I already knew, that when colonels gave orders, the United States military responded with precision that came from understanding exactly what was at stake. Around me, screens began changing color as my countermeasures took effect. Red zones shifting to orange, orange zones stabilizing to yellow. Not victory, not yet, but progress. Evidence that someone who understood digital warfare was finally coordinating our response. "Ma'am," a young captain approached my station, his voice tight with stress. "The attack on hospital systems is accelerating. They're targeting life support networks, medication dispensing, emergency communications. If we lose this, people die. People die." While my family had been worrying about my career trajectory, I was preventing deaths they'd never know had been threatened. I looked at tactical displays showing hospitals across the Northeast under siege, their critical systems being systematically compromised by enemies who understood that attacking medical infrastructure would create chaos that went far beyond digital warfare. "Redirect Teams Alpha and Bravo to medical network defense," I ordered, my fingers flying across keyboards while I spoke. "Deploy counter-intrusion protocols specifically targeting their malware signatures. And get me a direct line to CDC emergency operations if they're targeting hospitals. They might be planning biological attack coordination." The room exploded into controlled activity. Analysts redirecting resources, technicians implementing protocols, communications officers establishing channels that would coordinate our response across multiple agencies. All of it happening because someone with the rank and expertise to see the big picture was finally in position to coordinate everything they'd trained to do. This wasn't just cyber warfare. This was proof that while my family had been pitying my career choices, I'd been building something they couldn't measure in stock options or performance bonuses, the capability to protect the country they took for granted, using skills they'd never understand, carrying responsibilities that would have kept them awake at night if they'd known what I was actually doing while they slept safely in their suburban bedrooms. In the reflection of 40-foot screens showing America under digital assault, I could see exactly who I'd become. Not the family failure they'd described at dinner, but the Colonel Generals called when normal wasn't sufficient. And tonight, normal definitely wasn't going to be enough. The silence in the Strategic Operations Center wasn't the silence of combat. It was the quiet of victory, systems secure, threats neutralized, America's infrastructure intact after 6 relentless hours of digital warfare. Around me, 30 cyber warriors finally exhaled, their screens glowing green, hospitals stable, power grids running, financial systems unbroken. General Morrison approached, his 4 stars carrying an unusual weight respect. He extended his hand. "Colonel Taylor, tonight you held the line when everyone else faltered. Intelligence estimates suggest you saved thousands of lives, patients, passengers, first responders. All safe because of your decisions under pressure. Thousands of lives. While my family spent dinners discussing stocks and vacations, I'd been making choices that determined whether millions woke up in a functioning country. But the vindication I'd always wanted didn't come from Morrison's handshake. It came 18 hours later, broadcast into my family's living room. Black Friday morning, Westchester. 18 relatives gathered around Mom's television, expecting football highlights and shopping deals. Instead, CNN cut in with breaking news. The Pentagon has announced details of a major cyber attack prevented yesterday evening by a single officer. Conversations froze. Coffee cups hovered midair. And then, Colonel Stella Taylor, just 34 years old, coordinated the defense against what officials call the most sophisticated cyber assault in American history. Her leadership prevented catastrophic failures that could have affected 50 million Americans. Colonel. A rank they'd never cared to learn, now repeated across national headlines. Dad's wine glass trembled. Uncle Tom sat gaping. Aunt Linda stared, stunned, as the Pentagon praised the cousin she'd once dismissed. Colonel Taylor, the youngest woman ever to achieve this rank in her branch, exemplifies the leadership that keeps America secure while most citizens sleep. The youngest ever. While they'd insisted my career was playing soldier, I had become history. And then the line that must have stung most. Colonel Taylor's actions show why military service, though it may not create private wealth, makes all private success possible. At 0800, my phone lit up with messages. Dad, we had no idea. We need to talk. Mom, honey, why didn't you tell us? We're so sorry. Linda, I can't believe. I'm ashamed. But the message that struck deepest came from Uncle Tom, who'd once lectured me about followers never becoming leaders. Colonel Taylor, I don't deserve to call you Stella after how I treated you. You saved millions, and we mocked you. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to understand how I got it so wrong. Now, I read it while standing in the Pentagon courtyard, yesterday's uniform still on, the sun rising over the building where real decisions get made. Around me, officers moved with the quiet confidence of service to something larger than profit margins. The truth had finally pierced my family's narrow view, but it had always been clear to me. I'd never needed their approval to know my worth. Never needed their validation to confirm that some careers are measured not in earnings but in lives saved, freedoms defended, disasters averted. 15 years had shaped me into a shield, someone who could stand between chaos and America. Someone whose little military career had grown into leadership that generals relied on. Standing beneath the snapping flag, I realized true success isn't about being noticed. It's about being essential. They finally saw me. But I had always been here. The woman they mocked had become someone her country could not do without. Their laughter had stopped. My mission had not. Because some of us are born to be shields, silent, strong, unbreakable. And I would never apologize for choosing to protect people who could never fully understand what protection really costs. Stella's story reminds us that worth isn't measured by family understanding at holiday dinners, that some of the most critical work happens in silence, and that true leadership often means protecting people who will never know your name or understand the weight you carry. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated by people who should have known better, or if you recognize the sacrifice of those who serve without recognition, share this video. Let it reach someone who needs to know their invisible service matters more than approval from people who measure success in profit margins. Subscribe for more stories of quiet warriors, the protectors who work in shadows, the leaders who serve without seeking spotlight, the everyday heroes whose strength shows up in ways most people never see. Share this story with someone who chooses duty over recognition, service over profit, protection over praise. They deserve to know their sacrifice doesn't go unnoticed. Some of us are born to be shields, silent, strong, unbreakable.